Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Vistage webinar. I'm Ann Petrick, Senior Director of Research for Vistage, and I'm happy to host this latest webinar in our Leading in Challenging Times series. The series provides a definitive source of thought leadership on pressing topics facing you as small and mid-sized business leaders. Combining expert speakers like we have today and peer perspectives is how we help Vistage members make critical decisions that drive growth. Today, we've invited Dr. Eve Mesita to discuss several of the most critical root causes of stress in these times. She'll offer specific strategies for addressing these challenges at both the individual and organizational level. Not only will you get a deeper understanding of yourself and others, but she'll share a powerful set of actions for you to make real progress on some of the most significant causes of stress during these challenging times. I can't wait. Eve, over to you.
All right, Anne, thank you so much for having me. Wherever everyone else in the world happens to be watching this, whenever and wherever you happen to be joining us, thanks so much for being here with me today. We have the opportunity to tackle one of the biggest challenges that all of us are facing during these extraordinary times right now, which is really starting to get a handle on the root causes of stress, anxiety, anger, frustration in ourselves and in others. This is probably the #1 conversation that I am having with leaders around the world right now, beyond the normal conversations that we have here in Vistage. So we wanted to tackle this issue head on today. It has been a heck of a roller coaster, emotionally, mentally, for many of us, most of us, I would dare say all of us, over the last several months. For us, for our employees, for our colleagues, for our families and our communities. We're well into it now, and we still have quite a ways to go. So our goal today is really to get a better understanding of what is at the root cause of our greatest sources of stress, anxiety, concern, and struggle. And then what can we do now that will serve us well and others well now and in the future as we continue to navigate through these challenging times. So there are a lot of things we could try to tackle in the course of this conversation. I wanted to be realistic in terms of what we bit off. There's really 3 areas that we're going to focus on for the conversation today. And they're the things that you see on this slide. So first, I want to just really normalize the stress, the anxiety, and a whole bunch of other negative emotions that I didn't have room for on the slide that you and others in your life, professionally and personally, are probably feeling right now. So we'll start with that. We'll then turn our attention to highlighting 3 key root causes of that stress, anxiety, concern, anger, frustration, and so on. A lot of reasons for it right now. We're going to highlight 3 key areas. And the 3 key areas we're going to focus on are places where, third thing you see on the screen here, there are some actionable strategies that we can take both at the individual and organizational or team or family or community level to start to address those root causes of stress, anxiety, anger, frustration. So that's the plan of attack for the conversation here, normalizing all the crazy things that we and everyone else are feeling, highlighting some of the key root causes of that, and then turning our attention to what do we do about it for ourselves and for others. So we're going to start with normalizing stress and anxiety. And I want to be really clear on something right from the very beginning here, which is that everybody, and I mean everybody, is struggling to some degree. This is one of the things that has become apparent to me, painfully apparent to me, over the last several months, as I've had the opportunity at this point to have conversations with hundreds of different leaders at all levels in organizations around the world, is that nobody gets a free pass in this one. We are facing really an unprecedented global event, and nobody gets a free pass on this one. Everybody is struggling with something, even those of us, and that's probably many of us on this call, who are more fortunate than most for a variety of reasons. Everybody is struggling with something right now. If you feel like you haven't yet, we'll talk about that later. And if you haven't, your time is probably coming. So I just want to say, whatever stress, anger, frustration, anxiety you're feeling, that is totally normal and to be expected. It stinks, but there's nothing wrong with you per se, or other people in your life and world who may also be struggling. Your employees at work, your colleagues at work, your children, your partner, your friends, your family, your community. There are a lot of reasons why many of us, if not most or all of us, are struggling right now. I tried to be reasonable in terms of the number of things that I included on this slide that characterize the really extraordinary times that we find ourselves in right now. And as extensive a list as this is, it is still, as I'm sure you can all see, only a partial list of all of the unique challenges that we are facing right now. Some of which are unique to these times, some of which are not, but many of which are uniquely acute and uniquely painful these days. So we're not going to try to tackle all of the things on this slide. That would require way more time than we have. Where I do want to focus for our conversation today is on 3 of the key root causes that are underneath many of the sources of stress, anxiety, concern, depression, struggle that we are facing right now. And these are places where there's actually something tangible that we can do right now to begin to address these challenges. All of these things need addressing, but we're going to tackle 3 in the conversation today. So uncertainty, lack of control, and then emotional burnout. And we'll tackle these in turn, starting with uncertainty. And let's just be honest with something from the very beginning here. The world is always uncertain. That's how the world works. That's how the universe works. We like to kid ourselves most of the time and pretend that there's more certainty in the world that there is. The current times have made it very clear that the world is very uncertain, and it's difficult to kid ourselves about that right now. And when we think about how this uncertainty is manifesting for us, these are kind of 4 key ways that I think that is playing out most significantly for most people. First is this question of how long will it last? And when I use the word it here, it can mean a lot of different things. It can certainly mean the coronavirus, and all of the implications of COVID-19. Absolutely. It can also mean a lot of other things, and it may mean different things for different people. It may mean injustice or social unrest or economic downturn or health challenges or any other number of things. So when I say how long will it last? Yes, absolutely. COVID-19 is one of those questions. A lot of other questions around what it means here. Second question, how bad will it get? Again, it can mean many different things. How bad will it get? Open question. Nobody knows how long it's going to last. Nobody knows how bad it's going to get. Number 3, how will it impact me? Again, a super open question for most of us on a variety of levels. And then finally, what can I do? What can I do to make things better for myself, for my company, for my employees, for my colleagues, for my family, for my community? Enormously important questions, all of which have very uncertain answers at this time. And that is not, for most of us as humans, how we like to operate. When the entire world and our future and our livelihood and our relationships and our communities are up in the air and feel very uncertain, that can cause a tremendous amount of stress, very understandably, for all of us. Given these uncertainties, what I wanted to do was offer some suggestions around some tangible, practical things that we can do, particularly that we can do as leaders in our organizations, in our families, in our communities, to help to provide some degree of certainty for people in the world, recognizing that the world is very uncertain and there are boundaries to how much certainty we can provide. So what I want to focus on as a potential approach here, particularly as we look to help other people in our world who might be struggling, is focus on communication. And I want to talk about 2 particular elements or aspects of communication here, both providing information, so putting information out there into the world, and then also, and the second one is really important and so often overlooked, even by our very talented Vistage leaders, asking questions and really listening to those answers. I cannot count the number of conversations that I've had with Vistage leaders over the last several months, where when we talk about what can we do as leaders for our companies in particular, for our employees in particular moving forward, I can't tell you how many times communication has come up. And I would say 90% of the time, the conversations revolve around how do I put more information out there for other people? Only 10% of the time do we actually focus on the second part of the equation. the second part of communication, which is actually asking questions and listening. So I want to unpack both of these pieces here. We'll start with the provide information piece of the equation, because that's the more obvious piece, the piece that we probably have a lot of experience with as leaders in our organizations, in our families, and in our communities. And this is hugely important. And there are two things I want to focus on, two things I want to emphasize here in terms of how we can provide information for others in a way that helps, as much as possible, as much as realistic right now, reduce uncertainty where we can. So the first piece of the puzzle here is actually providing as much information as you can to as many people as you can as early as you can. Now, if there are any, legal, HR, other implications of any of the information you might share, absolutely check with the appropriate people before you share that information. But the default here should be to share as much as you can as early as you can, even if it's imperfect, even if you know that it's going to change as you move forward. There is a saying in science that nature abhors a vacuum, that nature essentially hates a vacuum. It's difficult to sustain a vacuum in nature. Things will move in there to try to fill that vacuum. The same thing is true with humans. In the absence of information, people will make stuff up themselves. And I can pretty much guarantee you that whatever people make up will not be what you want them to make up. Employees abhor a vacuum. In the absence of information from leadership, they will make up or find information to fill in the blanks, and it won't be what you want them to come up with. Same thing with children, same thing with partners, with friends, with family. We don't like to live in a world where we don't have information, and we will come up with it, we will find it, we will make it up if it's not provided to us. So if your options are provide maybe imperfect information that's partial and is likely to change a bit as time goes on, versus leave employees or family members to make stuff up on their own, the lesser of those two evils is definitely do the best you can to share as much information as you can as early as you can, again with the caveat that it's imperfect and it may change as we learn things moving forward. Now, related to this is this concept, the idea that authenticity is more important than perfection. And this comes to sharing information with people, employees, and our families as well. One of the really frequent conversations that I have with leaders in the Vistage and other sessions that I do is there is this persistent belief among leaders, probably not unique to Vistage leaders, but I certainly hear it from Vistage leaders, that there's an expectation that we as leaders have to have the right answer all of the time. We always have to know what to do. We always have to be right all of the time. That is an unrealistic expectation to place upon ourselves. And I think it's one that we largely place upon ourselves. We often believe, leaders often tell me, that they think other people have that expectation of them as well, that their significant other expects them to be right and have an answer all the time, that their children do, that their employees do, that their colleagues do. I'm not sure that that's actually true. As I talk to people around the world, what I most often hear is that people aren't looking for you as a leader to be right all of the time. They're not looking for you to have an answer, a solution all of the time. They recognize that that's unrealistic. They recognize that you're human. What they're looking for is authenticity. What they want you to be is genuine, vulnerable, authentic. And part of that is stepping into the space of saying, I don't have perfect certainty about the world right now, where we're going or what we need to do. I'm scared and concerned and angry and frustrated as well, but here's what I know at this time, and here's what our plan is moving forward. So I would encourage you to resist the urge to wait until you have perfect information, to wait until you feel you can communicate everything perfectly. A, you're never going to reach that time in these uncertain times, and B, that's not what people are looking for. So again, remember, authenticity, vulnerability, genuineness, transparency will always beat perfection. All right, so that's one piece of the equation when it comes to communication. The other side is a piece that we really often overlook, even as very sophisticated leaders here in Vistage, and that's not putting information out, but it's taking information in. So what I really want to encourage you to do here as well during these extraordinary times is to ask questions and listen. And two ways I want to frame this for you. First is actually asking this specific question of your employees, of your colleagues, of your children, of your significant other, your friends and family. What are you scared or angry about? And you can add other things in there as well too. What are you frustrated about? What are you irritated about? What are you concerned about? What are you depressed about? Feel free to add in anything there, but it needs to be the negative, scary emotions, the stuff we don't want to talk about. Actually asking people what they are concerned, scared, angry, frightened about, rather than assuming, and then listening very carefully to those answers. And then the second piece of this is, after having done that, asking this: what do you need from me as a leader? What do you need from me as your boss, as your partner, as your parent, as your friend, as your brother, as your sister? Or what do you need from us as a leadership team, or us as an organization, or us as a family, or us as a team? Now, I will tell you that very often leaders, humans, are afraid to ask these questions of other people because they're afraid of what they're going to hear. That is probably precisely why we need to ask these questions. Rather than assuming what's going on with other people, actually asking what's going on, being willing to listen to whatever they have to say, and then asking, what can I do to be helpful? Very often people are also afraid to ask this question because they're afraid of the answer to the second question: what do you need from me or us? What if what an employee or my partner or one of my children asks of me is something that I cannot do or that I'm not prepared to do? You can fully expect that that may come up. That's a very legitimate concern. And what I've learned over time as I've worked with leaders and organizations who have stepped into this space is, people aren't necessarily expecting you to do all of the things that they ask for. That's an unrealistic expectation, and most people know that. What they want is to feel heard and understood. So if there's certain things that you can do, absolutely do those things, and that's fantastic. If there are certain things that people ask for that you cannot do, don't want to do, aren't prepared to do, if you can explain to them why not and see if there's an alternative that's mutually acceptable, that for most people is far more satisfying than not even asking the question in the first place. Okay, so I encourage all of you as leaders in your organizations, in your families, in your communities, to have the courage to ask these questions, really listen to the answers, and think about what you and others can do to begin to address the needs and the requests that are coming out of the answers to that second question. So that's the first piece of the puzzle, which is uncertainty. I want to turn our attention now to the second challenge, the second root cause of uncertainty, or second root cause of stress and anxiety and concern and anger and frustration in the world these days, and that's lack of control. And boy, if we ever kidded ourselves that we have control over our world, the universe and people in it. Current times have reassured us that that is likely not the case. Sort of like uncertainty, we have probably far less control in our world than we think we do, and that's really been highlighted by the last several months. So many of us feel a lack of control in sort of all of the important parts of our life, in our professional life. We don't necessarily have much control over our career, our business, the economy, our industry. Our home life, whatever illusions we might have had about the control we have at home over our children, our grandchildren, our partners, the last several months have certainly called all of that into question, I think, as well. And the final one here, this normal freedoms. This is not an insignificant piece. There's so many freedoms that we normally take for granted. The ability to go wherever I want, do whatever I want, see whomever I want, whenever I want to do that. For many of us, much of that is gone. And we didn't fully appreciate how important that was to our feelings of control and self-determination. The fact that you cannot get on a plane and fly wherever in the world you might want to right now. Even if you didn't choose to do it, you don't have the opportunity to do that. Or get in a car and drive to see your mother in a nursing home, and on and on and on. Go to the theater and whatever. The loss of these normal freedoms, the lack of that control, is not an insignificant stressor for many of us. So in a world where we feel like we have so little control over so many of the important parts of our life right now, what do we do about that? I want to suggest a very specific, very tangible, tactical strategy called start, stop, and keep. And the idea here is control the controllables. So even in a world where a lot of things are outside of our control right now, there are still things that we do have influence and control over. We want to identify opportunities to take control over those critical parts of our life right now. So start, stop, keep, as you might imagine, does have three pieces. The first question is asking yourself, what do I need to start doing right now to really help enhance, improve my own mental and emotional health? What are some maybe small things that I can start doing that will help make me feel better moving forward? So is it something as simple as making sure that you carve out 30 minutes a day every day to go on a walk? Is it making sure that you take 15 minutes at the beginning of the day to meditate? Is it making sure that you have the opportunity to read at least one chapter of a book every day? Is it making sure you have the opportunity to have at least one face-to-face conversation, even if it's socially distanced, with somebody important to you sometime during the course of a week? So again, what are one or two or three small things that you can start doing right now that will help your mental and emotional health that you have the ability to impact? Second question to ask yourself is, what do I need to stop doing? And for all of us at this point, a few months into this, there are probably a few things that fall into this category. For most of us, we have developed, totally understandably, some crutches, some emotional or mental crutches that have helped to get us through the crisis times, the hardest of these times, the beginning of these times, things that we have relied on to soothe our emotions, to numb our emotions, to just get us through the day. Now is probably the time to start to investigate whether or not it's time to let some of those things go. So are there behaviors, are there habit patterns, are there thought patterns that maybe we need to revisit? Maybe not as much alcohol as early in the day. Maybe not as many servings of ice cream. Maybe not as much time on Amazon or Netflix or whatever it is. Again, are there one or two things somewhere in your life that are no longer serving you well and that need to be left behind? And then the third question is, what do I need to keep doing? So what are some things in my life that are actually working really well now? These may be new things that I've developed in the course of the last several months, or they're things that I've managed to hold on to from my previous life that are actually serving me well, that are really helping keeping me centered and emotionally and mentally stable. So again, maybe you actually are already doing 30-minute walks, and that is the only thing keeping you sane right now. Maybe you didn't do that before the pandemic, but now you are. Maybe that's something you want to hold on to moving forward. As the world starts to reopen and many of us start to be tempted to go back to old ways of doing things, are there certain things that maybe we've developed even in the course of the pandemic that are serving us well, that we want to make sure to protect as we move forward? Okay, so again, what do we need to start, stop, and keep doing to really enhance our own mental and emotional health? We cannot control everything in the world, but there are certainly areas of our life that we do have some control over. So this is our opportunity to control the controllables. Now, I've described this exercise as an individual exercise. What can I do myself to start, stop, and keep doing to enhance my own mental and emotional health? This is absolutely something that you can do with other people as well, and that you can do at a group level as well. So you might think about doing this exercise with your team or your organization as a whole at work. You might think about doing it with your significant other. You might think about doing it with your whole family or with your group of friends or a larger community group. So again, this is absolutely something that you can do both at the individual level and then at the group, organizational, family, community level as well. And I really encourage all of those conversations. All right, the third piece of the puzzle here, the third root cause of stress, anxiety, concern, anger, frustration I want to talk about is really something that's been an underlying component of all the conversation we've had so far, which is simply addressing head-on this problem, this challenge of emotional burnout. Most of us have felt it during this time. For some of us, it's been fairly constant. For others, it's been on and off. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. If you haven't felt it yet, your turn is coming. I can pretty much guarantee that. It stinks, but that seems to be the way that this works because we're all human, and these are extraordinary times. So 2 things I want to talk about in this space. One is too much for too long, and the second is this concept of mirror neurons. So I want to start with the most obvious piece, or the more obvious of these two, which is this idea of just too much for too long. And basically all of us have been in fight, flight, or freeze mode for too long. The human animal is really well designed to respond to crises of different types. We are incredibly well designed biochemically, emotionally, mentally, physically to respond to different types of crisis. And in tremendous moments of crisis, stress, and danger, when life, existence is really on the line, when a bear is about to attack us, when a car is about to hit us, when the world is crashing down around us as we watch it, we are really well designed to be able to respond to that in powerful and effective ways. The problem is what we are not designed for is to stay in this state for extended periods of time. We are designed to stay in this state to get away from the bear, to avoid the car crashing into us, to deal with the immediate and imminent threat. We are not designed to stay in this heightened level of arousal for weeks, for months. I'm not even going to say years because I don't want to go there, at a time. And we have all been in this crisis mode for far too long. Us as leaders, us as humans, our employees, our children, our partners. And the cracks are beginning to show, very understandably. Again, if you haven't gotten to a crack yet, your time is probably coming. And what I'm discovering, I would say, over the last maybe 3 to 4 weeks in my conversations with Vistage leaders is that those of us who tend to be the mental, emotional rocks for the people in our lives, we are the folks who hold it together when everybody else in the world is losing it and is not able to hold up, is not able to hold on. We often, as Vistage leaders, are the ones that everybody else turns to because we are, in fact, able to hold it together while everybody else is losing it. Our time is coming. We've been holding it together for so long, not just for ourselves, but for other people, that we are getting worn out too. Everybody else cracked way earlier in this pandemic, but it's catching up with those of us who have been holding on for longer than everybody else, and that is very understandable. So that's one piece of the emotional burnout puzzle. The other thing I want to highlight is this idea of mirror neurons. This may be a concept that's familiar to some of you. For others, it may be a new concept. And mirror neurons are actually physiological components of our bodies that we as humans have. Other animals seem to have them as well. Some other animals seem to have them as well. And mirror neurons, they're actually a type of neuron, are the things that allow us to experience the emotions of other people and animals and creatures as if they were our own. So that allow us to feel the joy, the happiness, the celebration, the gratitude of other people as if they were our own. And it's part of the absolute bedrock, the foundation of human civilization. These are the things that help bind us together as families, as communities, as organizations, as teams. These are essential to human existence. They are fundamental to the concepts of empathy and compassion, which again are the bedrock of highly functioning societies and teams and families. So they're hugely important, the ability to experience other people's emotions as if they were our own. The flip side of this, unfortunately, is that mirror neurons don't just allow us to experience the positive emotions of other people, they also allow us to experience the negative emotions of other people. And there are a lot of negative emotions out there in the world right now. There are almost 8 billion people on this planet right now. And as I said earlier, everybody is suffering. Everyone is struggling. There is a tremendous amount of fear, anger, anxiety, frustration, depression in the world right now. So we're not just carrying our own stresses and anxieties during this time, we are also recognizing and resonating and feeling the challenges of the other 8 billion people that we share this planet with. And that's a tremendous amount of additional emotional stress. So given all of this, what do we do about it? There's really only one way out of this one, and that is emotional release. We have got to find some way, each of us individually and then collectively as groups as well, to release the emotional pressure. All of these emotions, our own and others that we've been carrying, especially those of us who like to carry the burdens of other people because we know we can take it. We're tough here in Vistage. We have a tremendous amount of emotional resilience. We have a very high pain threshold, most of us. We are able to endure more mental, emotional, and often physical pain than most people, and we still have to find a way to let this out. So I'm going to give you 3 options here. They are all equally valuable. You can choose whatever approach you like. You can choose a combination of approaches. Whatever works well for you is absolutely what you should do. But one way or another, you got to release the pressure on the negative emotions that you are carrying with you right now in productive ways. Otherwise, they're going to come out in unproductive ways. Those are your options, productive or unproductive. Those are the only 2 options here. So option number 1, talking to somebody else, finding a friend, a family member, a colleague, a member of your community, a helping professional of some kind, and sharing your struggles. And for the record, and this is the unfortunate messy bit, you can't just talk about all of the things that are happening in your life. You actually have to talk about how they make you feel. All the negative, scary emotions that you don't want to admit to, that you don't want to feel, that you certainly don't want to confess to other people, you got to get that stuff out. And here's the beauty of this. The other person does not have to solve it for you, which is awesome because they probably can't even solve it for themselves. So they certainly don't have to solve it for you. All they have to do is listen with compassion and empathy. That's it. They just have to be there to hear it. Okay. So again, all you're looking for is a way to get these emotions out and to have someone else hear them. Now, if you don't have another human in your life, for whatever reason that fits the bill here, I have found that other creatures work great. Dogs work great for this. Cats work great for this. If you have a horse, a pot-bellied pig, a fish, it doesn't really matter because again, you don't need that other creature to solve it for you. You just need to get it out of yourself. So again, feel free to choose some other best buddy in your life that is not a human. Humans probably are first choice, but lots of other options that work great here as well. Now, if that option doesn't appeal to you or you want to consider another option, option B, option 2 is writing. Just doing stream of consciousness writing, getting out of your brain the struggles, the fear, the anxiety, the concern, just getting it out into a journal, onto a piece of paper, into a computer, into your phone. We're not looking for Pulitzer Prize writing here. Stream of consciousness about here's what I'm experiencing, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm struggling with. And for the record, nobody else ever has to read it. In fact, I recommend that you don't show it to anybody else, unless you want to, totally up to you. But I recommend it is just for you. You don't even have to read it again. You are welcome after you write it and get it out of your head, get it out of your heart, to shred it, to delete it. If you've got a safe way to burn it, to burn it. All you're looking to do again is not to solve it. It's simply to acknowledge it, recognize it, give voice to it, and get it out, release the pressure. All right, third option, if you're not the writing type, you're like, nope, journaling is for my 13-year-old daughter who writes in a journal with like sparkly unicorns on it. Not a journal kind of person. Got a third option for you, and that is record it. Pull out your phone, your computer, your tablet, a camera, and actually record all of these same things. You can do voice memos, you can do video, whatever you want, right? Channel your inner Captain Kirk. Captain's log, stardate 2259.55, right? Again, you don't have to solve any of the problems. You just have to express, give voice to the negative emotions that are pent up inside of you. You just got to get them out of you some way, and then you are welcome again to delete it on the other side of this. That is totally fine. All right. So I want to talk about where we've been, where we go from here, and then add a couple of additional things for you as well. So in terms of 3 of the key root causes of stress, anxiety, concern during these times, we talked about uncertainty, lack of control, and emotional burnout. It's a lot more than those 3, but those 3 are certainly enough to begin with. And we also talked about what do we do about each of those things. So for uncertainty, we had communication, both providing information and then also asking questions and really listening. For lack of control, we had the exercise around start, stop, and keep. And again, that's something I encourage you to do at the individual level for yourself, and then for whatever group of humans you care most about as well, your team, your company as a whole, your family, a community group. And then last but not least, we talked about emotional burnout, excuse me, which totally understandable, absolutely to be expected in these extraordinary times. And we talked about really the only way out of that is emotional release. And you got 3 options there. You can talk it out, write it out, record it out. And again, you don't have to solve it. You just have to name it, acknowledge it, feel it, and release the pressure. All right, one last thing I want to share with you before I turn to a final close slide with sort of a quote that I want to end on. One final thing I want to share with you, and this is this idea of self-compassion and just compassion generally. One of the things that has been really clear to me over my nearly decade now of working with Vistage leaders is that we are incredibly hard charging. We are ambitious. We are hardworking. We have obscenely high standards for ourselves and often for other people as well. And those high standards are really getting tested right now. And so I want to talk very specifically about 3 key things. One is you want to recognize that your best and other people's best right now is variable. We always want to make sure as leaders, as humans, that we are showing up and giving our best. We are being our best selves. We want our employees to do that. We want our partners and our children to do that. Absolutely, that's still true. And we also need to recognize that what our best is right now might not be the same as what our best is under ideal circumstances. Following from that, I encourage you to give yourself and others a break. We as Vistage leaders tend to be incredibly hard on ourselves, and we often pride ourselves on that. We say, yes, of course I'm incredibly hard on myself. That's part of why I'm so successful, is because I'm so good at beating myself up when I'm not doing perfection. This is maybe not the time to hold yourself to that impossible standard, okay? Yes, you want to give your best. You want the best from other people, and what that looks like might be different for a time. And then finally, if you've got a situation where you or someone else truly is underperforming where you need them to be, I encourage you to engage in an exercise that uses this question. So let's say, for example, you've got an employee who is genuinely underperforming, who is genuinely engaging in behaviors that are not okay right now. An approach might be to say, these are the behaviors you're engaging in now. These are the behaviors we need from you instead. What would it take for you to behave in this way? And then you see what they say. Because you don't want to have to guess and hope you guess right. It is perfectly acceptable to put the burden on the person who is underperforming, who is behaving in ways that are not acceptable, and say, this is what we need instead. What would it take for you to behave in these ways? And then see what they say. Okay? And for the record, you can do the same thing for yourself. If you say to yourself, okay, I am working out 1 time a week right now. What I need is to work out 3 times a week. What would it take for me to work out 3 times a week? See what it would take for you to behave in those ways. Okay, so again, compassion first for yourself and for others. Your best, other people's best, absolutely what we want, and it might look somewhat different for a time. And that's just the reality we're working in right now. All right, so final thing I want to leave with here is a quote. I introduced my nerd status earlier with the Star Trek reference. I will solidify my nerd status here by ending with a quote from Lord of the Rings, which is one of the 3 books in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This actually comes from the first book in that trilogy, The Fellowship of the Ring. And if you're not familiar with the Lord of the Rings story, basically it's a story where the world is broken, in chaos, in danger. And our heroes, a small group of sort of ragtag heroes, must find a way to essentially save the world. And relatively early in this journey, two of the key characters find themselves in a particularly difficult time. And Frodo, who's really sort of the main character in the book, is lamenting all the pain, suffering, death, struggle, and uncertainty in the world. And he says to Gandalf, who at this time is one of his traveling companions and is a wise and powerful wizard, Frodo says to Gandalf, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. And Gandalf, in his wisdom, says, "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." And I think that has never been more true for all of us as humans as well. I think I speak not just for myself, but probably for the other close to 8 billion people on the planet, that all of us wish that these times had not happened during our times. If you'd asked us at the end of 2019 what we wanted for 2020, this is probably not what we would have hoped for. But that is not for us to decide. What we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And this time right now, when everything in the world seems like it's in chaos, when everything feels broken, when it feels like all the regular rules don't apply, that there are no rules at all, this is a unique opportunity for all of us to reimagine what is the world, what is the company, what is the family, what are the relationships that we want to create on the other side of this. There's a tendency to want to just recreate what existed before, to want to go back to that because we're desperate for that. But we have a unique opportunity right now when everything feels so broken to think very specifically and creatively and boldly about what's the world, the company, the family, the community, the relationships we want to create on the other side of this, and reimagine a world that isn't the same, but is better. And that is a tremendous opportunity. So with that, Anne, I will hand back over to you.
That is a tremendous opportunity that we have. I feel like I'm speaking with Brene Brown. So thank you so much, Eve.
Thank you.
I do have a few questions that go back to some of the things you shared with us today. First, you said that everyone is struggling to some degree and we're not designed for this. But what if someone doesn't feel stressed or anxious? Are they really kidding themselves? Can it
Yes,
be, are they missing some mirror neurons?
Yeah, one of my favorite questions, because this is a conversation that I have a lot, and I've really come to the conclusion that one of two things is going on there. One is they either are in denial about it, and again, I don't say that you're in denial, not you personally, but you generally, with any judgment associated to it, because that is part of our coping strategy for many of us. And I will raise my hand as one of the folks who historically have struggled with this. I am really good about taking negative, scary, difficult emotions and stuffing them down into the dungeons of my psyche and not feeling that stuff at all. At least I don't think I do. But then it sneaks out in really unfortunate and undesirable ways. And so I would encourage anyone who thinks, I'm fine, I'm totally cool, the rest of the world is falling apart, but I'm good over here, to see whether or not that might be what's going on. Lift the trap door on the dungeon of your psyche and see if there's anything in there. I would encourage you to engage in the talk, write, or record exercise and see if anything comes out. Very often people get surprised by that. And even if you do that and you think, nope, did all those exercises, still totally good, my suspicion is your time is coming. Again, I genuinely have yet to meet any human, no matter how fortunate or strong during this time, who doesn't have some challenge going on, even if it's because of the pain and the struggle that they're seeing other people engage in. So it's probably in there. Your job is to get it out.
Yeah, I would imagine someone like that would have problems tapping into empathy. Do you have any recommendations for someone who feels fine and how they can be more empathetic to others?
Oh, wow. This is a whole nother webinar, probably.
Okay.
The first place that I would start, you mentioned Brene Brown a couple of minutes ago. That's like the greatest compliment you could pay me. So thank you for that. I would encourage anybody who's interested in developing greater empathy, either themselves or in others, to really start with any of Brene Brown's um, work, and we can include links to that in the resources for this webinar. She has a lot of really wonderful books that she's written. She has a Netflix special, which I highly recommend. And one of the newest things that folks might actually be interested in checking out, particularly during these times, she has a new podcast called Unlocking Us. So if you're more of a listener than a reader, and if you're looking for things that are really timely to the unique challenges that we're all facing today, she launched it really kind of, I think, at the beginning of March. So everything is really on topic, really on point right now. That, I think, would be a great place to start as well.
I agree. I've listened to those. They're fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. One of the other things I love that you talked about is that authenticity is more important than perfection. So I think one of the biggest obstacles might be maybe getting the leadership team aligned on this concept. So do you have any suggestions on getting a leadership team together to think this way in terms of how they're communicating with their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first things that come to mind for me are the going through the exercises that I described in this session as a team, including the ask questions and listen. So actually getting the leadership team together in a room and telling people in advance, here are the questions we're going to ask. What are you most angry, scared, frustrated, worried, nervous about? What's keeping you awake at night? What's freaking you out? Come prepared to discuss those things, and it is not okay to not have something to share. And really going around the room and beginning with an honest, authentic conversation about that. And the higher in the food chain, the first person who speaks, probably the better. So if you are the CEO and you have an opportunity to go first and be super vulnerable and authentic about that, that really sets the standard for anybody else. It's hard for everybody to do that if the people above them aren't doing that. So same thing goes if you're a parent and you want to do it with your family, you got to go first on that scary stuff. And again, it's not okay to not have an answer because frankly, I'm not buying that, not in these times.
Yeah. Oh. Well, it's interesting because not only are people reacting to different stressors that you had on the slide that you listed, but I think also how long or how bad it will be can also be variable as well. So outside this listening session that you talked about, how can leaders quickly identify those stressors and the related actions quickly to be able to mitigate the impact on the business or for their coworkers?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to probably having these kinds of conversations on an ongoing basis. Ideally, you don't want to ask these questions once, have these conversations once, assume we're good, and just move on from there. Because if the last several months have made anything abundantly clear, it's things change really quickly. And the thing that was our number one stressor a month ago or a week ago might not be the thing that is stressing us out, making us least productive a week from now. So making sure that you're checking in and doing kind of a pulse check periodically to make sure that we're keeping track with what feels like a 24-hour news cycle every 5 minutes these days.
Oh, that is true. So that's a question I have. How do you balance the desire to be informed about what's going on in the world with the need not to become overwhelmed by anger or fear? I want to know, but I also want to be able to actually function every day.
Yeah. And this is a really tricky one right now because it is very easy to fall into the rabbit hole of media and social media and everything else, information, misinformation, disinformation, questionable information that is out there right now, and find yourself very quickly in a very bad place. And this really is a little bit of a balancing act. I think that given the availability of information 24/7 these days, it does not require that much time or effort to be well informed. I think with all of the resources that we in the world have these days, being really specific about two things, which is being thoughtful, careful, and selective about where you get your information and about how much time you devote to it every day. I'm going to give what's going to sound like sort of an arbitrary number here, but I think it's reasonable for a human who wants to be well informed and yet remain functional to get all the information you need about what's going on in the world within an hour every day. If you are spending more than an hour on social media or tracking down more and more and more information or going down the rabbit hole of comments in posts, which is always a dangerous thing to do, you might want to think about time limiting that, and also really thinking about curating your sources of information, looking for information sources, and different people can make different choices about this, and that's totally cool. Curating your information sources and focusing on sources that provide as factual data as possible without feeling the need to tell you what you should think about that data and information. So again, the more objective information that doesn't come with other people's opinions attached to it, and limiting yourself to like an hour a day, I think is a fairly reasonable strategy, because again, we want to be well informed, we want to know about what's going on, we want differing sources of information and ultimately opinion, and we want to keep that under control because it can spiral very quickly.
Yeah, it can. And you actually talked about things to stop doing. And as you were talking about that, I thought, well, I'm going to stop getting notifications on my phone, because that it creates that rabbit hole, because next thing you know, I'm outraged by 1,000 things. So I'm going to stop the notifications.
Nice.
So speaking of things to stop doing, there, we all have some numbing or coping behaviors. I like the idea of doing that as a group activity in terms of the things to stop or start, but the things to stop, that requires being self-aware, or those behaviors are demonstrated in a way that others can see them. So do you have any suggestions for getting a fresh look at those patterns we've fallen into?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one, which is probably also the scariest one, is what you sort of alluded to towards the end of your question, which is asking somebody else who knows you well, personally or professionally, saying, you know what, I've been in fight or flight survival mode for the past several months here. I think I've probably adopted a few strategies that are not as helpful as I would like them to be. What do you see me doing that's maybe not as awesome as you might like for me? And then see what people say. Now, you got to choose carefully here. You got to choose people who know you well enough to be able to answer that question, and people who are willing to be honest with you on that one. And then you also have to be willing to respond to whatever they share with you in a way that makes them likely to answer that question for you again at some point. So if you ask that question, be prepared for whatever they're going to share with you. You may not like it. I mean, you probably won't like any of their answers. You're doing these things because they've been helpful or soothing to you in some way. But recognize that if you're willing to ask this person, it's because you believe they have your best interests at heart. So assume positive intent on their part and be willing to hear whatever it is they have to share with you. And again, it's up to you whether or not to change it, but at least be open to considering it. Ultimately, the decision is yours.
Great advice. And one last question that falls directly into that. And you said that being heard is sometimes more important than the actions related about what people might need. So how can you determine if that's really the case? What if what they need is something greater than what you can provide?
Yeah. And this is a tricky one, right? So I think when I say being heard is sometimes even more important than the actions, there's no getting around that actions do speak louder than words at the end of the day. So the actions we take are enormously important. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where, for most of us, change in our organizations, in our families, in our communities, in the world needs to happen. Actual actions need to happen. And we also need to recognize that sometimes the precise thing that someone asks for may not be something that we can do or that we can do ourselves, or that is the right answer at this time. And so at least being willing to enter into a dialogue. If not that exact thing you asked for, is there something else that we can do that meets that need, but also is realistic and fits within what is possible and is best for the organization, the community, the family, the whole. So I think, again, even if the first thing that is asked for isn't possible, it may be, upon further conversation, we find out that it is. But at least being willing to engage in a dialogue about, if not that, what else instead is hugely valuable.
Yeah, one of the most impactful sessions I went to years ago said, instead of saying no, but say yes, if. So the idea of, yes, we can help you that if we can do it this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember somebody said something to me very similar recently. They said they were trying to shift their own response to things from no because to yes if.
Yeah.
So rather than explaining why I can't do something or why we can't do something, say, well, if we can do certain things, maybe that actually is possible. And I think that's a wonderful reframe to offer. That's awesome. Thank you.
Great. Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Eve, and being part of our Leading in Challenging Times series. And thank you everyone for watching today. To see upcoming and past webinars in the Leading in Challenging Times series, visit vistage.com/LCT-webinars. That's vistage.com/LCT-webinars. Thank you all. Be safe and be well.